doesn't have to be home by midnight, and there won't be any happy ending. Because this is a case where you only have the evil stepmother, and as a result of that, an 11-year-old child was starved to death at her hand, while her own children remained healthy and happy.
This is the jury's verdict in case 18B 1541-1. This is the state of Georgia versus Tiffany Nicole Moss. Verdict, count 1, murder. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder. Count 2, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of felony murder. Count 3, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of felony murder. Count 4, cruelty to children in the first degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of cruelty to children first degree. Count 5, cruelty to children first degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of cruelty to children first degree. Count 6, concealing the death of another. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of concealing the death of another. Signed and dated by the foreperson. Please give it to counsel and the defendant for their review as to form. Any exceptions to the form of the verdict by the state?
No, Your Honor.
Any exceptions to the form of the verdict by the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Does the state wish a poll of the jury? Does the defense wish a poll of the jury? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, there are some matters that we need to take up outside of your presence. If you'll please remember the instructions I gave you previously and go out with our bailiffs. Thank you.
What could make a stepmother starve her own stepdaughter to death? What turns everyday routine into cruelty and trust into control? October 2013, Lawrenceville, Georgia. A quiet suburban apartment. A young girl just 10 years old confined to a single bedroom. She should have been laughing, learning, playing. Instead, she was trapped, isolated, left to fade away unnoticed. Neighbors saw a polite, composed woman, but behind closed doors, life was measured in hunger and fear. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was already too late. The result, a tragedy that shocked a community and a crime so cruel it would put a woman on death row. This is the story of Tiffany Moss, a stepmother, a hidden torment, and the girl whose life was stolen before it truly began. If you're drawn to stories where reality is darker than imagination, subscribe to The True Crime Teller, because what happens next only gets harder to believe. Emani Moss, a 10-year-old girl with a gentle and trusting nature, found herself increasingly confined within the walls of her own home. In the Lawrenceville apartment she shared with Tiffany and Emani Moss, she was restricted to a single bedroom for weeks at a time. Meals, attention, and comfort were withheld while her biological siblings were cared for and nourished as usual. Over the course of this confinement, Emani's health deteriorated steadily. She became frail, unable to move easily, and forced to live in her own waste because she was too weak to maintain basic hygiene. The physical effects of neglect were compounded by the psychological toll, fear, confusion, and the knowledge that the adults she relied upon were denying her essential care. The abuse was not sudden, but part of a longer pattern. In 2010, Tiffany had disciplined Emani with a belt, leaving bruises and welts. 2 years later, in 2012, Emani made attempts to run away from the apartment. She reported that she had been tied to a chair with belts and forced into a cold shower as punishment. Though these incidents were reported to authorities, no effective intervention took place, leaving the young girl vulnerable to continued mistreatment. Multiple reports to Georgia's Division of Family and Children Services, DFCS, had gone unheeded over the years. Teachers and school officials noticed signs of neglect. Emani's frailty, slow eating, and apparent isolation, but the system failed to intervene in a meaningful way. Neighbors and extended family members had voiced concerns, but the warning signs were missed or dismissed. The prolonged deprivation had profound consequences, and Manny's muscles weakened. Her organs shrank, and bed sores formed from constant immobility. Hunger, pangs, and fatigue became daily companions, and simple movements, once easy, required extraordinary effort. Her body and spirit were steadily diminished, all while Tiffany continued to maintain a normal routine with the rest of the family, cooking, texting meal photos, and caring for her biological children. By the time the situation reached its tragic conclusion, Emani was trapped in a cycle of neglect, a child whose vulnerability had been exploited and whose suffering had been allowed to continue unchecked. On October 28, 2013, 10-year-old Emani Moss passed away. She weighed just 32 pounds, the size of a toddler. Weeks of neglect had drained her small body, leaving behind a story no child should ever endure. How does a life fade away unnoticed under the care of those meant to protect it? But death didn't end the secrecy. Tiffany Moss and Emani Moss hid Emani's body inside their apartment. In a chilling attempt to erase the evidence, they placed her in a galvanized trash can and tried to set it on fire. The flames barely touched her remains before being extinguished, and still they returned the body to the apartment, maintaining the illusion of a normal home. Behind closed doors, a child's trust had been betrayed, her innocence stolen. Could anyone imagine that the person entrusted to nurture her could be the source of her suffering? Emani Moss was gentle, bright, and entirely dependent on the adults around her for care. But in her own home, the stepmother she should have been able to rely on became a figure of control, isolation, and deprivation. What drives a person to love some children while allowing cruelty to another? On November 2, 2013, Emani Moss dialed 911. He told the dispatcher that his 10-year-old daughter, Emani Moss, had died after drinking chemicals, a story he later admitted was a lie. The events of those final days mark a turning point, setting the stage for investigation, arrest, and the legal reckoning that would follow. Once the authorities were notified, the investigation moved swiftly. Law enforcement uncovered a chilling pattern. A young girl had been systematically starved and confined while her biological siblings were cared for and nurtured. Tiffany Moss was charged with murder, first-degree cruelty to children, and concealing a death. The charges reflecting both the abuse and the deliberate attempts to hide it. Moss, Emani's father and Tiffany's husband, faced his own legal consequences. In 2015, he agreed to a plea deal, receiving life without the possibility of parole in exchange for his testimony against Tiffany. His statements painted a detailed picture of the abuse, describing how Tiffany confined Emani, withheld food, and documented care selectively for her biological children. Investigators also gathered corroborating evidence. Text messages between Tiffany and a man showed meals being prepared and shared with other children, while Emani went without nourishment. Forensic and medical evidence confirmed the extreme emaciation Emani had suffered, providing a heartbreaking record of prolonged neglect. Witness testimonies added further detail, confirming that the abuse had persisted over years and that warning signs had gone unheeded by authorities. The case quickly became a focal point for both law enforcement and the community, a stark reminder of how cruelty can hide behind the ordinary routines of a family. The stage was set for a trial that would not only examine the acts themselves, but also the chilling mindset behind them. When Tiffany Moss entered the courtroom to face the charges against her, she made an unexpected choice. She would represent herself. Despite the judge's efforts to appoint counsel, she declined full legal representation. From the start, she refrained from making an opening statement, calling witnesses, or cross-examining those who testified, including her own husband. The prosecution laid out its case with meticulous detail. Witnesses described the abuse and confinement in text messages between Tiffany and Emani, illustrated the selective care of her biological children. a stark contrast to the treatment of Emani. The medical examiner provided particularly sobering testimony, explaining how Emani's body had gradually weakened from prolonged starvation, fatigue, organ shrinkage, bed sores, and the physical pain of hunger. Over weeks, jurors were shown evidence of previous incidents, including belt beatings and forced cold showers, reinforcing the pattern of control and cruelty. The cumulative weight of the testimony left little room for doubt. Even as Tiffany remained largely silent, the prosecution's narrative of neglect and cruelty resonated with every account, photograph, and forensic report presented. The courtroom itself was tense, a space charged with emotion. Family members recounted their memories of Emani, her gentle laugh, her school projects, and the everyday innocence of a child who trusted the adults around her. Their testimony added a human dimension to the clinical details of starvation and confinement, bringing to life the loss that had reverberated far beyond the walls of the apartment. Throughout the trial, Tiffany's silence and refusal to engage with the defense process left the prosecution's case largely uncontested. Each piece of evidence, from the text messages to the autopsy report, painted a clear, chilling picture of a household where one child's needs were systematically ignored. By the time the trial concluded, the gravity of her actions was undeniable, setting the stage for the jury's decision. In April 2019, the jury reached a verdict in the Gwinnett County courtroom. Tiffany Moss was convicted on all counts: malice murder, felony murder, first-degree cruelty to children, and concealing a death. The deliberation took less than 3 hours, a reflection of the overwhelming evidence presented during the trial. On May 1, 2019, the formal sentencing followed. Tiffany Moss was sentenced to death by lethal injection, a sentence that marked her as the only woman on Georgia's death row at that time. Her case remains exceptionally rare, highlighting both the extreme cruelty of the crime and the legal consequences of prolonged child abuse resulting in death. Prosecutors emphasize the severity and deliberate nature of the acts. District Attorney Danny Porter described the crime as one of the worst cases I have ever seen, noting the prolonged starvation and the clear indifference shown toward Emani's suffering. He highlighted the stark contrast between the care Tiffany provided to her biological children and the neglect she imposed on her stepdaughter, underscoring the calculated cruelty of her actions. The jury's reasoning centered on this combination of premeditation, prolonged suffering, and the betrayal of a child's trust. While Tiffany Moss has appealed her conviction as of 2024, no execution date has been set, and the case continues to spark discussions about capital punishment, child protection policies, and systemic failures that allowed a man's abuse to go undetected for so long. Through the conviction and sentencing, justice for Emani Moss was affirmed, even as the case serves as a sobering reminder of the vulnerabilities children face and the responsibilities entrusted to adults. Tiffany Moss's actions may have ended one life, but the legal and societal reckoning continues, ensuring that the lessons of this tragedy are not forgotten. Tiffany's methods were systematic. By isolating Emani in a single room and depriving her of food, she maintained dominance over the child, enforcing a rigid hierarchy within the family. Text messages and witness testimony revealed the stark contrast between the care provided to her own children and the neglect imposed on her stepdaughter, reinforcing the sense of deliberate cruelty. Her courtroom behavior further underscored a lack of remorse. Insisting on representing herself, she declined to call witnesses, cross-examine her husband, or offer an opening or closing statement. Observers noted her calm and detached demeanor, a silence that many interpreted as either indifference or a refusal to engage with the consequences of her actions. Experts have speculated that Tiffany's decision-making may have been influenced by psychological factors, including prefrontal and premotor brain damage affecting judgment and impulse control. The case also reflects a broader phenomenon often called the Cinderella effect, in which step-parents are more likely to inflict harm on non-biological children. In Tiffany Moss's actions, prosecutors argued this tragic combination of resentment, control, and indifference culminated in the ultimate betrayal of trust. Emani Moss's death sparked nationwide attention, not only because of the cruelty she endured, but also because of the failures that allowed it to happen. The Georgia Division of Family and Children's Services, DFCS, had received multiple reports of neglect and thinness over the years. Yet the child remained in the household. Emani's grandmother later filed a lawsuit highlighting the systemic lapses that failed to protect her granddaughter. Do you think DFCS should be held legally responsible when a child repeatedly slips through the cracks? The case became a catalyst for policy change. DFCS implemented improved screening protocols and strengthened procedures for investigating child neglect and abuse, ensuring that warning signs would be taken more seriously in the future. Schools, social workers, and law enforcement agencies examine their roles, recognizing the need for vigilance in timely intervention. Beyond bureaucratic reform, the story prompted public discussion about step-parent abuse, the Cinderella effect, and the responsibilities adults hold toward vulnerable children. Tiffany Moss's actions and the legal response that followed continue to influence debates on lethal punishment, child welfare oversight, and the balance between personal accountability and systemic safeguards. Do you believe Tiffany Moss deserved the death penalty, or should life without parole have been the punishment? Share your thought in the comments section. At the heart of this tragedy was Emani Moss, a bright, innocent 10-year-old whose life was stolen far too soon. She loved school, cherished family routines, and depended entirely on the adults around her for safety and care. Yet within the walls of her own home, the protection she deserved was replaced by isolation, deprivation, and suffering. But how many times do you think society overlooks quiet, isolated children who are suffering in silence? Justice, in its slow and deliberate course, was ultimately served. Tiffany Moss now resides on Georgia's death row, held accountable for the choices that led to a man's death. While no sentence can undo the pain, the legal system recognized the magnitude of the harm and the deliberate betrayal of trust. But beyond trials, verdicts, and sentences, it is Emani who must be remembered. Her story is a stark reminder of the responsibilities we carry as a society to protect children, to intervene when warnings appear, and to ensure that no child is left invisible within a household or community. But share your thought. What more do you think communities can do to prevent cases like this from ever happening again? Her memory also serves as a call to action. Each warning sign ignored, each systemic lapse carries consequences. Advocates for child welfare continue to study her case, pushing for reforms, educating caregivers, and reminding the public that vigilance can save lives. If you saw a child showing signs of neglect, would you feel confident reporting it? And do you think others would too? If this story moved you, subscribe to The True Crime Teller, share this video, and help keep a man's memory alive. Remember, it's the victims who deserve to be remembered, not the perpetrators. By honoring her life, we reinforce the lessons she leaves behind, that children are precious, that trust must be safeguarded, and that even in the face of tragedy, society must strive to protect the innocent. Emani Moss's life may have been short, but her legacy continues, reminding us all of the profound impact of care, compassion, and accountability. What do you think about the execution that just took place? Do you believe it was just or not? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to keep up with the next executions.